Welcome to Sisters of the Shadows, where mystery meets meaning. Together, we'll explore stories that spark curiosity and connection. Step into the circle, the shadows await.
Welcome back to Sisters of the Shadows. Tonight, we're stepping into one of the most universal childhood rituals ever whispered at sleepovers. A legend that lives in bathrooms, mirrors, and the bravest corners of our imagination. We're talking about Bloody Mary, the woman behind the mirror who has terrified generations. This story blends folklore, psychology, witchcraft, and that very specific childhood fear of staring at your own reflection too long in the dark. But before we dive in, I have to ask, did you guys ever try the Bloody Mary ritual growing up?
You know I did. I mean, I feel like we all kind of had those sleepovers growing up where we did it. I definitely did.
Imma be real. No, I have not. I have friends back home that did. I didn't. I was too scared. I'm like, "Nah, I'm good. Y'all can have that one." I'm not doing that.
Well, I wasn't big on sleepovers, but I do have a sister, and I think we've tried it maybe once or twice, but I'm somebody who's not big on the dark. So the turning the lights off and shutting the bathroom door was already enough for me to be like, no.
That's totally fair.
Okay, so Bloody Mary is one of the most recognizable and long-lasting urban legends in modern folklore, largely because it's interactive. Unlike most ghost stories, this one doesn't ask you to visit a haunted place. It asks you to participate. All you need is a mirror, darkness, and the courage to say her name. That accessibility is part of what makes the legend so powerful. Nearly everyone has stood in the bathroom at night staring into their own reflection. I have not. I have wondered, even for a split second, what might happen if they stayed a little longer. I was too scared to do that, so no, I did not do that. Why do you think this legend feels so personal compared to other ghost stories?
I feel like it's just so widespread. Everybody has heard of it. It's had its moment to shine. It's been included in different movies and whatnot. It's kind of iconic. Just word of mouth spreads and it's been around for so long.
I think I have to agree with Erica. I think that it seems personal because it's something that you hear from a friend at school on the playground or your cousin stays the night and it's like, "Hey, have you ever heard of?" And it really tries to scare you, but I feel like because you're actually actively participating at home in your own bathroom, it feels super personal, and then like she said, it's been in movies and video games and books, and people have referenced it everywhere that it seems like if you don't know, you've been living under a rock.
Right, and they also have a drink name out there, so of course people would know.
Right.
Yeah, and this, I mean, let's be real, it's one of the most widespread urban legends in the Western world. And in case any of y'all didn't know, Bloody Mary is an apparition that's said to appear in mirrors when summoned through ritualistic practices.
Yeah, and that's good. So when I was younger and when I heard about this story, I tried to cover the bathroom mirror with a blanket. I did not want to participate in none of that, girl. I was scared. Mind you, I've been watching horror movies since 7 years old. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know about this one. It's a little too personal. At its core, though, Bloody Mary is a summoning legend. She doesn't appear randomly, she's invited. Folklorists believe this is why the story sticks so well with children. It gives them agency. You're not just hearing a scary story, you're daring the unknown to respond. That sense of control mixed with fear creates an intense emotional memory. which is why so many adults remember this ritual decades later with surprising clarity, which is true. Do you remember the first time you heard about Bloody Mary and how old you were?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say probably when my mom started letting me have sleepovers, maybe like a preteen? It's been a long time, and as you said, I remember it with clarity. That feeling is so creepy, and earlier today before we started recording, I was thinking about, should I go try it? Right now, I think I'm good.
Same. I was like, should I? I'm intrigued. But then when I was doing the nose, I'm like, I'm saying her name 3 times. And I'm checking back. I'm like, wait, there's no mirror. I'm good.
I think for me, I don't quite remember. I know I had been young, like elementary school age, but I don't think I actually heard it from a friend. I think I watched a movie of some sort and remember trying to convince my sister, oh, we should totally do this. And she was so hesitant at first. And I was like, no. And I was like, really, do it, do it, do it. And I was like, "See, I'll go first." And of course, as soon as she shut that bathroom door, and our bathroom didn't have any windows, so it's super dark. And I was like, "Nope, let me out of here." And she was all like, "Did something happen?" I was like, "Girl, we didn't even get that far."
And it makes me think of, I think it's Paranormal Activity 2, where they have a little Bloody Mary scene, and of course, in Paranormal Activity, there is an entity that is very present, and the reaction they got when they did it in that movie, oh my gosh, so creepy.
I think when I last heard it was in middle school. I think 6th grade is when I really heard about it and heard all the stories. And one of my teachers talked about it too. It was during Halloween season, and I'm like, ooh, uh, I'm good.
I think maybe next, should we dive into the origins of Bloody Mary?
Yeah, so Bloody Mary is, like you said, one of the most widespread urban legends in the West. And like Raya said, it is ritual based, and she comes as an apparition that appears in the mirror when summoned. The story, blends folklore and psychological phenomenon and century old fears around mirrors, spirits, and feminine vengeance. Possible roots for the legend, if we want to go that far, the first person that I found was Mary First of England. She ruled from 1553 to 1558 and earned the nickname Bloody Mary after executing hundreds of Protestants. But the darker part of her story is her pregnancies. She had multiple miscarriages and phantom pregnancies, which fed into the idea of a grieving, vengeful spirit. And some versions of the legend say that when she appears, she's holding a baby or at least a crying baby. So that's one of the ones that I found. And I thought, a fun fact with that was mirrors in her era were rare and expensive, and only the wealthy owned them. So the idea of the queen appearing in one felt powerful and terrifying. So, do you think the legend would have stuck if we wouldn't have given her the nickname Bloody Mary?
That's such a good question. I feel like yes, just because there's something so iconic about the legend and thinking about it and doing it. I don't know. I feel like if people tried it, even if the name was different, that they would have been kind of intrigued. And I think that helps with a legend sticking around.
Right. And then the fun fact, as you was reading, Jada, is mirrors was really expensive. And so the fact that a queen pops up in it, that is powerful and terrifying. So yeah, I think if she didn't have the name Bloody Mary, I think still it will be known just because of the legend.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I think in my opinion, I think the legend stuck around because we gave it a super cool like nickname. A lot of the legends that we have is because the name stuck around really because if you really think about it, you know the Mothman, but how many people know the Mothman story? You know what I mean? So I feel like if she didn't get the Bloody Mary title and just stayed Mary the First of England, I don't think it would be talked about or I guess be a legend itself. It would just be another historical event.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I see what you said. Yeah, I agree with that.
And now I want to touch on the American folklore, where we have Mary Worth. She is the American version of this. She's described as a witch or healer from the 1800s. Some stories say she kidnapped girls for experiments. Others say she was executed by her town and cursed them with her dying breath. Her story blends perfectly with New England witchcraft fears. And a fun fact that we found here is that there's multiple towns that claim to have housed the real Mary Worth, but none have historical proof. She's pretty much a folklore shapeshifter. And then I wanted to ask, why do you think so many Bloody Mary versions involve witches?
That's a good question, actually. I want to touch base on the fun fact though. I did read up on that because it was saying Mary Ware is buried in Wisconsin. I'm like, no way, she's not. And then I read at the bottom, some people think she's a shapeshifter. And I'm like, say what? When I was reading it, and I'm like, that's crazy and terrifying at the same time.
Right. So, should we talk about mirrors and some mirror superstitions now?
Mirrors play a huge role in why this legend works psychologically and culturally. Across many civilizations, mirrors have been seen as more than reflective surfaces. They're thresh- thresholds, truth revealers, and sometimes even traps for souls. In some traditions, mirrors are covered after death to prevent spirits from becoming trapped or returning. Bloody Mary already has a perfect stage before the ritual even began.
And mirrors have always been seen as portals or soul traps. And in Victorian times, families covered mirrors after someone died so that the spirit wouldn't get stuck. And in some cultures, mirrors can steal your soul if you stare at them for too long.
Mirrors really are viewed as portals in European folklore, suggesting they can trap or release spirits. Victorian death rituals, such as covering mirrors after a death to prevent spirits from becoming trapped, reinforce superstitions. From a psychological standpoint, staring into a mirror in low light can genuinely alter your perception. When the brain receives limited visual input, it begins to distort what it's seeing. Faces can stretch, features blur, shadows can move. This effect can cause people to see things that feel completely real in the moment. What makes Bloody Mary fascinating is that even when people learn this explanation later on, many still insist that what they saw felt different. It felt attentional, aware, or like something was watching them back.
And some fun facts that I found was in Russia, breaking mirrors means 7 years of bad luck and a restless spirit. And in Japan, mirrors are sacred objects used in Shinto rituals. So, why do you guys think mirrors freak people out so much?
Gosh, that's again such a good question.
And
I don't know. Isn't there a saying where you'll never actually get to see what your face looks like straight on because you're only able to see it in mirrors? It's just inherently so interesting. Like you're seeing yourself, but not seeing yourself.
Right. And then too, mirrors hold so much power, I feel. Like it holds portals and it's a door.
Right.
Especially they've been used for rituals and like, oh, break it one. You said you're into bad luck. Like, girl, I've been hearing that since I was younger. I mean, since I was young. And growing up, I still to this day believe, oh, if you break a mirror, get it out the house ASAP. Or it's 7 years of bad luck. And I'm like, I can't do that.
And you know what that made me think of is I don't know if y'all have seen the movie Oculus. Such a great movie, but a really creepy mirror situation. That is a really good movie.
It reminds me of the movie Mirrors. It was the first time I've ever really seen not really ever seen mirrors being used in a scary way, but where that's the whole premise of the movie. And I thought that was very interesting because to know that this demon creature thing gets to you through your mirror and to think about how many mirrored objects you pass by or have in your home alone. I find people who have a mirror in every room to be a little suspicious. Why do you need a mirror in your hallway or, odd places like that?
Yeah. I gotta watch that movie because I haven't watched that movie.
But you should. And this also reminds me, I had a friend in high school. I'd sleep over in her room, and right next to her room was sliding mirror doors. Oh, just gives me the chills. No, not at night, not when I'm trying to sleep. No, thank you.
No, thank you. All right, let's dive into ritual variants and modern pop culture.
Yes.
So the ritual has countless variations, and that inconsistency is what keeps the legend alive. Different numbers of chants, different rules, different warnings. If nothing happens, the explanation is simple. You did it wrong. The folklorists say this adaptability makes Bloody Mary nearly impossible to disprove and allows each generation to reinvent her slightly while keeping the core spirit intact. Paranormal believers argue that the ritual itself it is what matters. Darkness, reputation, focus, and intention are all common elements in spiritual practices across cultures. Saying a name repeatedly is seen as a form of invitation. From this perspective, Bloody Mary may not be a specific spirit, but rather something that responds to being called. Some theorize she's a thought form created and strengthened by belief and reputation over generation. So the question, do you think something can exist just because enough people believe in it?
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that people all believe the same thing can be truly impactful and powerful. So I'm gonna have to say yes to that.
I have to say
agree.
flat out yes. I believe that if enough people believe in something, it's manifesting. You know what I mean? If you believe hard enough. I know it sounds crazy. If you believe hard enough, it's almost like the Slender Man. It's like after my time. My kids talk about it, but the Slender Man, I did watch a video on it one time, and it is really just the power of everybody believing in this creature that brought on this entity, I guess. And so that really it makes sense. Yeah. If I, tell 100 people something and they tell 100 people something and whether for Bloody Mary's case, whether it's a different variation, it's all the same outcome.
Right.
Right.
Totally agree. But yeah, so let's get into some of the common summoning rituals. First of all, we're reciting Bloody Mary, but we have people that are doing it 3 times, 7 times, or 13 times. And you do this in front of a candlelit mirror while spinning or using running water. Additional elements that have been seen include scratching the mirror or using a handheld mirror in darkness. And some of the reported outcomes that people have said they've seen include sightings of a woman's face, scratches on the summoner, sudden temperature drops, and flickering lights, all reinforcing this legend. Feelings of being watched, whispers, or cries enhance the haunting atmosphere associated with summoning Bloody Mary. And of course, there are so many pop culture references, as we've always kind of mentioned. Influences from films like The Candyman or The Craft reflecting mirror summoning lore, as well as Oculus 2, as I had mentioned before. And we have to think about the impact of sleepover culture from the 80s to the 2000s on the perpetuation of the legend. And I know for me, yes, that's so true. Sleepovers in the 2000s, we were talking about this. And TikTok has also seen a resurgence featuring Bloody Mary challenges and modern interpretations of summoning rituals.
Wow. So that's crazy. So to sum it up, the most common ones is saying Bloody Mary's name, whether that be 3, 7, or 13 times. A candlelit bathroom mirror, spinning in circles, running water, dripping faucets, scratching the mirror, using handheld mirrors in the dark. And then just to sum up some of the reported outcomes that you touched on were the apparitions of a woman's face, scratches appearing on the summoner, sudden temperature drops, light flickering, feeling watched or touched, which is kind of creepy, and hearing whispers or crying. So the number matters too. So 3 is symbolic for ancient rituals, and 13 is tied to witchcraft and bad luck. So I was kind of wondering, which version did you guys hear when you grew up?
I personally have only heard of 3. I actually had no idea about 13, but obviously it makes sense tying it to witchcraft and bad luck. And I think I've heard 7 too, but I think for me 3 is was the main thing that I remember hearing.
So growing up, I heard 3, but as I got older into my adult years, I heard about 13.
Mhm.
I've been reading, do research. I think I read too much because I be finding out things. I'm like, ooh, and then if they sound intriguing, I kind of dig deeper in it.
Right.
And I read that 13 is tied to witchcraft and bad luck, and I'm like, oh my, did not know that until now. Right, the things you find out.
Again, for me, I think my first introduction to it was through I can't even remember what movie, it was so low budget, but I'm not gonna lie, I remember it being 5, and I don't remember it having to be a candlelit bathroom, but I do remember that the water had to be running, and, I do remember that it was the apparition would show up and you would get the scratches, so it was, like, kind of merged, and it wasn't until later on in my teenagehood when I'm actually talking to other people and, like, seeing more media of Bloody Mary that I realized that 5 was the wrong number, and a lot of people were saying 3, and I was like, "Oh, okay."
I don't know if I remember the candle part either. I thought it was fully pitch black, but as we've touched on, there's so many different versions of this. And a fun fact, the first printed version of this ritual was seen in the 1970s, and it involved chanting, "I believe in Mary Worth." So that touches into that American folklore version again.
Mm.
That's very interesting. 'Cause
Hey,
to think that, some of these legends, I guess you would like to think are really old,
Mhm.
but it seems the American version, although, yes, it is based off of older times, didn't really get written down and probably passed around by written form until the 1970s, and that feels kind of late. That wasn't that long ago, I guess.
Right? In my head, I thought we were talking about 1800s here. Another good question is why do we think this legend keeps coming back every generation?
Now that is the question of the day.
Right? I feel like TikTok and social media in general plays a huge part in this. Let's be real.
I
It plays
agree.
a part in every aspect of our lives these days.
Right.
I
I think
agree.
now it's social media that really keeps the legend alive. I know for our generation, it was the sleepovers that
Yes.
really kept it alive. But I feel like kids don't do sleepovers anymore, but the challenge phenomena has been going on. Everything is turned into a challenge. So it
Yeah.
was just bound to happen for Bloody Mary to make its way again, especially with the repeat of, the 2000s culture. So I'm
Right?
very interested to see after, the social media resurgence. I wonder for the next generation how it's going to be brought up.
Right? And I feel like everyone is able and wanting to come out with real encounters they've experienced for this, among other things. We have personal accounts from childhood sleepovers, school bathroom dares, and just paranormal forums all over social media. We've got Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. But yeah, these experiences that people are sharing regarding Bloody Mary challenges and drawing on these regional adaptations. Like I was reading, we have La Rona in the mirror as a variant now, but it's swirling all over the internet and people are talking about it. And that is kind of what this generation has been all about is social media and online transparency.
Yeah, and everybody is turning things into challenges these days. So I feel like it's gonna keep continuing, continuing, continuing just because of that.
Definitely.
Also, reported encounters with Bloody Mary tend to follow similar patterns, which adds to the mystery. People describe their reflection changing first, eyes darkening, facial features distorting, or a second face appearing behind them. Others report physical sensations like cold air, pressure, or the feeling of being watched, which is very creepy. What's especially interesting is that many claim that fear doesn't end when the ritual does. Nightmares, avoidance of mirrors, and lingering anxiety are commonly reported afterwards. I'm not gonna lie, because when I was younger and I heard about it, I guarantee you, I was looking. It's like when it turned dark, I was scared to close my door and scared to sleep in my own room. So I would literally purposely go wake my sister up and tell her, hey, let's have a sleepover in my room. And then I'll close the door and then I can go to sleep. I can't. Like, girl, this right here had me on edge for a good minute.
Oh, for sure. It's just crazy thinking back on childhood and experiencing firsthand and seeing how the new generation is absorbing them.
You're right. Also, one of the most intriguing aspects of Bloody Mary is how often children are the ones involved. Most reported experiences happen between the ages of 7 and 14, a time when imagination is powerful, fear responses are heightened, and belief hasn't yet been replaced by skepticism. Some paranormal researchers argue that children are more sensitive to experience where adults dismiss or rationalize away. I feel like when we were kids, it is more often that we would try to do something like this versus a full grown adult.
Right. The age range is about right for when kids are doing sleepovers. I think after 14, you're really hitting that teenage time where, sleepovers aren't the same. And like Soraya said, and once you're 18 and up and you're off to college and you hit 21 and you start drinking, I'm pretty sure standing in the bathroom trying to say somebody's name, a couple is like half of people can't even use the bathroom, let alone be in there trying to do challenges.
Right.
So I think it makes sense. And then, like you had mentioned, that's around the time where they still believe in the ghosts, or you can still get them with at 7, I have a 7-year-old and she still believes in Santa Claus because it's the imagination of how much effort you put into it. And I feel like actually, hearing about it from your friends and seeing about it online for the kids nowadays and watching everybody do it, it really feeds into that spooky feeling that it's going to happen. And I feel like they scare themselves half the time.
Oh,
Right?
I totally agree with that.
So some of the stories that I found interesting were the unexpected witnesses to those who do the Bloody Mary challenge. We talked about some of the outcomes that people were saying were happening to them. And some things that I found interesting were that during some of these rituals, sometimes an outside person would actually see something. And so we've had reports of siblings walking past and seeing shadows in the mirror, or parents hearing crying from the bathroom. So, do you think spirits show themselves more to kids or adults?
If I see a shadow in the mirror and I'm just walking, I'm going in my room or in my mom's room and I'm hiding till daylight. You would not see me again till the AM. Not happening.
I
um,
agreed.
I think they show themselves to kids more. I feel like just because they're more curious and more vulnerable than adults.
Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. I think kids are more willing to accept and look for spirits, and their innocence makes them more susceptible to feeling that. But of course, I could say the same about us shadow sisters because I'm definitely attuned to looking for spirits. Let's be real
I'm
here.
not. Yeah, say I'm guilty of that. I feel like it can also be an even match simply because you do have adults also that like, hey, I'm curious. I want to go look for this.
I think my opinion is the spirits themselves aren't necessarily trying to show themselves more to one or the other. I just feel like kind of because of how the kids' brains aren't as skeptical as ours, hasn't really, developed logic and reason. I feel like they're more sensitive to those apparitions or spirits, just kind of like how dogs or your cat, like sometimes people's dogs will be barking in the corner and they're like, oh my gosh, there has to be a ghost over there. You know what I mean? Or you see a lot of ghost videos where it's the animal that reacts first because they're
Like
more
how my cat was just licking
sensitive.
his.
And I also wanted to touch on the concept of the mirror malfunction. We have people doing this challenge or summoning, whatever you want to call it, and then all of a sudden the lights flicker, or a mirror cracks, or reflections are getting distorted or lagging. And this could be attributed to the Troxler effect, which can literally make your face melt or morph in low light. Your brain just stops recognizing your own features. So that makes me want to ask y'all, have you ever stared at yourself so long to see your face start changing?
No, I personally haven't stared at myself for long periods of time to be like, oh, my eyes are moving or my nose is starting to melt off my face. I don't spend that much time in the bathroom to want to
Right.
do that, but now I kind of want to go stand in the bathroom and look at myself for a little bit.
I'm out right now too. I'm like, now that I'm asking them, like, maybe I'll be right back. I'm gonna go try that right now.
Right. Let me light a candle and go stand in the bathroom for 5 minutes and just stare. But then I don't know, because then now I'm kind of spooking myself, and if I see something, I'm gonna be upset.
Right? Also, I think next we were going to talk about the psychological things happening here. Some people swear that they brought something home, they feel like they're being watched, and they dream of women in the mirror and they avoid bathrooms at night. So, Jada, do you think rituals can open doors even if you don't believe in them?
I feel like for me, the process of opening doors during rituals, you gotta believe. I feel like if there isn't belief there in the ritual, it's not really doing anything. I think the power of believing is what opens those doors. So I really can't say that I believe that that's true.
I totally agree with you on that. And this brings me into the next part here of credibility versus myth. We've got believers and we've got skeptics. And believers have been exploring viewpoints like mirrors are viewed as portals, like we already mentioned. Spirits responding to ritual energy is very possible. Global mirror folklore, consistency, and emotional vulnerability during summoning also is something that's been explored. And the skeptics address phenomena like the Troxler effect that we just talked about earlier, low light hallucinations, group hysteria, urban legend reinforcement, and the impact of adrenaline and fear conditioning during sleepovers. Which, if I remember anything from my past sleepovers, that happens. There's all this lore and talking that happens. Bloody Mary refuses to disappear because she taps into universal fears. We have fear of darkness, fear of seeing yourself differently, fear of calling something you can't send back. And she doesn't chase you down a hallway or appear in a graveyard. She was quietly behind the glass until someone looks too long. So then I'm going to ask y'all again, where do you fall? Are you a believer or are you a skeptic?
I would have to say I'm a believer. Have
Right.
I tried it personally in my adult years for this specific urban legend? No, I haven't. But after this, I might give it a whirl.
Right? What about you, Ryan?
I am a believer, I'm not gonna lie. I feel like I've been a believer since my younger age. I'm not gonna lie. Still now, my adult age, just talking about it. I'm kind of intrigued since my fiance home. I might do the ritual
Right?
by myself.
I am considering it when my husband gets home, but he's also gonna look at me like, "Really, honey? Like, do we need to be doing this right now?" But let's close off Mary.
In the end, Bloody Mary survives not because she's proven to be real, but because she's never been fully explained away. She exists in the space between belief and doubt, between childhood and adulthood, between reflections and imaginations.
So Bloody Mary survives because she taps into universal fears, mirrors, the darkness, the unknown, the feminine rage, and the childhood vulnerability. She's a part of history, part of folklore, and a part of psychology, and part something we still can't explain. And now the real question. If someone asked you guys to do the ritual right now, would you?
I think so, like we just said, if you've got someone with you and you're not doing it alone, I think so, yes. But would I do it alone right now?
Oh, no. I think that's the thing. When you got other people around you or someone with you, it's kind of easier to be like, yes. But if you're by yourself, hell no. I
Right.
think it will be yes for me.
All right. And so that brings us to an end of our deep dive into Bloody Mary, a legend born from fear and the stories we whisper in the dark. But the next segment we're stepping out of the bathroom and into the fog covered streets of Victorian London. And we're taking on one of the most infamous urban legends in history, Jack the Ripper, a killer who became more myth than man, whose shadow still stretches across true crime and paranormal lore. So take a breath, cover your mirrors, and get ready because our next story lives in the alleys.
All right, so we are into Jack the Ripper now. Jada, do you want to start us off with an overview of what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so we're stepping into the fog-took streets of Victorian London, a place where shadows stretched long, fears clung to the alleyways, and a killer walked unseen, leaving behind a mystery that still haunts the world more than a century later. So now, before we get into real dark details, remember our goal is always to honor the victims, explain the history, and just shine some light on the folklore and hauntings that grew from the tragedies. So let's start by stepping into Whitechapel in the late 1880s. Imagine narrow cobblestone streets, dim gas lamps, and crowds of people packed into tiny, crumbling buildings. This was one of the poorest districts in London, overcrowded, underpoliced, and full of desperation. Crime was high, poverty was everywhere, and many women turned to sex work just to survive. And with no real forensic science, no cameras, and barely any street lighting, it created the perfect hunting grounds for someone who knew how to disappear. So when you're looking at the conditions of Whitechapel at the time, what stands out to you most about how the environment shaped the investigation?
That's such a good question. I'm picturing like Gotham City, this creepy, spooky vibes, and the underpleased and just dim lit lands. It sounds like the perfect setup for a horror movie. What do you think, Raya?
I think the same thing. It's given creepy feeling, the eerie feeling, just walking by yourself at night.
It kind of puts your hairs on edge. It's just creepy.
Right. I need someone to walk with me every night.
Right.
And so, a fun fact, or maybe even a creepy fact, is that newspapers at the time were obsessed with the sensational stories. So, they practically fed the legend of Jack the Ripper as it was happening. Some historians even argue that media helped create the myth more than the killer himself.
Wow. Also, Jack the Ripper is one of the most infamous figures in true crime history. Not because we know who he is, but because we never did. His crimes took place in 1888 in the Whitechapel district of London, a place already overwhelmed by poverty, overcrowding, violence, and desperation. The Reaper didn't just murder, he exploited a broken system, disappearing to a city that was already struggling to care about the people he targeted. Question: do you think Jack the Ripper would be remembered the same way if his crimes happened somewhere else?
Hey, I don't know. I feel like yes, because the world kind of clings on to these iconic, murder stories of serial killers. And I feel like yes, but it is hard to say because legends just take on a life of their own at different times and places. So that's a tricky one.
For me, I'd have to say I think, yes, like Erica said, all serial killers at the end of the day get almost time in the light and become a legend themselves, and whether it's good or bad. I think if it was in a different area, I don't think it would necessarily be the legend of who Jack the Ripper is, because, with it being a low poverty place, I don't think the police were really actively walking those streets compared to if this was the neighborhood that had the mayor and the judge, and
Right.
then he probably would have been caught quickly.
Right.
I guess if he was going after people that society seen were on a higher level, they're the middle class or the upper class compared to lower class, maybe it would have been not necessarily, he wouldn't be a legend for like who is Jack the Ripper, but more or less just for the crime itself.
I agree with that, honestly. I'm a piggyback after what you said, Jada. I agree with that.
I totally agree. And I want to touch on the victims of Jack the Ripper. They were almost all women living on the margins of society. Many were impoverished, homeless, or engaged in sex work. They lived in lodging houses where dozens of people shared rooms, making privacy basically impossible. This environment made it a lot easier for a killer to blend in and harder for witnesses to track movements or timelines accurately.
And so, touching on the victims, we have the canonical five, though some argue there were more. Now, when people talk about Jack the Ripper, they tend to usually refer to these five women, and this is because historians believe these five women were for sure uh, killed by the same person. So, that's why these five are the ones that are touched on, and then the other ones are still up in the air.
I did not know that. I knew it was 5, but I didn't know it's more.
Me neither.
The canonical 5 victims: Mary Ann Nichols, August 31st, 1888. Mary Ann was the first found on Bucks Road. Her death shocked the community because of the brutal reality, and because it seemed so sudden, like the killer appeared and vanished in seconds. Annie Chapman, September 8th, 1888. Annie's murder showed isolation. The killer was getting bolder, more precise. Some investigators believe he had medical knowledge. Found in their backyard on Hamburgberry Street, cut, organs removed with surgical precision. That's crazy.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what the canonical 5 went through. Next was Elizabeth Stride. She passed away on September 30th, 1888, and this one's really interesting because she had no mutilations. Many believe the killer was interrupted. It's one of the biggest what ifs in this case. And she was found on Burner Street, throat cut, no mutilations. Like, we believe the killer was interrupted. And then next, we have Catherine Eddowes, who passed away on September 30th in 1888 as well. Less than an hour later, from what we just talked about Elizabeth Stride, Catherine was found in Mitre Square, and this is where the case takes a darker turn. Severe facial injuries and a missing kidney were reported.
Oh
So,
my.
yeah, this one crazy. And then I think Jada's gonna go into our next victim.
So the next victim was Mary Jane Kelly, and she died November 9th of 1888. Now, Mary Jane Kelly was the youngest and the only one that was killed indoors. Her room at Miller's Court is still considered one of the most haunted places in London. She was found in Miller's Court with a very brutal crime scene, and it suggested escalation or comfort with the risk of, unfortunately, the tragedy. So, out of the canonical 5, which case do you think investigators struggled with the most and why?
I feel like this is really tricky because with each one, the victimology and motive is changing. I think about one, like, that's the most messed up, but then the next one is different, so it is hard for me, but I feel like, honestly, the last one is the most jarring just because of that change in MO that they had.
Right. I
Yeah.
think the last one had to probably have been the most challenging just because, like you mentioned, it was the change in MO. I feel like 2 in 1 day, that might also have been strange because he never really went after more than one woman in 1 day. So they might have been 2 separate events. And then for it to only be less than an hour later, you wouldn't think that somebody would just kill somebody and then within the hour be walking, finding, and trying to kill somebody else, you know? So I feel like maybe that one was kinda hard to connect at first.
Definitely, I agree.
Right. I agree with that. I would have to say the last one. And then the question of why the change, and why one wasn't mutilated, but the rest were, and why she was killed indoors and the rest wasn't. So I feel like it would be more than one question that they would struggle with.
Definitely, and that makes us think about what did these women have in common, and I know Jada had a cool fact on that.
Yeah, so the chilling detail that is that all of these women lived within walking distance of each other. So the killer didn't even need to travel far, and he knew the immediate area.
Oh, wow.
Crazy.
That's insane.
I wonder if he's been watching their every move.
Well, the scary part is this could be the neighbor or the barkeep or the newspaper man or the guy that delivers everybody's milk, if that's how they do it. That's the crazy part. The fact that they don't know who it is, but he has such intense knowledge of the area and he's just walking out and about
Right.
and nobody is none the wiser.
What if he's one of those ones where he only walks out at night, so he's not noticeable
Mhm.
enough to intrigue people. Yeah, just like he just mind his own
Right.
business, but yet he's watching their every move.
And he's unsuspecting.
Or he could be somebody that is very well known, like the local doctor, so they felt comfortable being like, "Oh, hey, it's not odd to see you on this night in this part of town because everybody knows you." And maybe that's how he's getting away with it or catching these women off guard because if I was one of these women and we all lived in walking distance of each other, I would be trying to buddy up or
Yeah.
not walk around at night. So there must have been some type of comfortability to where these women felt
Yeah.
okay being by themselves.
Yeah, and Raya's gonna touch on how serious these murders were and the brutality behind them.
So let's dive into the murders. The murders themselves were shocking even by Victorian standard. The killer demonstrated a disturbing level of violence and apparent ec- anatomical knowledge, leading some to believe he had medical training or experience as a butcher. Bodies were mutilated, organs removed, and in some cases placed deliberately, suggesting the killer wanted his work to be seen. These details fueled public panic and intense media coverage. Question: do you think the reality was about rage or about sending a message?
I feel like it's both. The brutality might have just been inherent to this person's personality, but of course, sending a message is a very probable option too, because these are serious things that this person did to these victims. Organs removed, bodies mutilated. That surely can't just be about sending a message. There's an inherent rage that this person was experiencing.
I agree with Erica. I think it's both, especially with one of the victims where he brutally attacked her face, I think you mentioned. That was out of rage. That wasn't simply because he was trying to, oh, well, look at my work. I feel like the display of the body parts is the sending of the message, look at my work. But I think the initial attack is out of rage.
I totally agree with that. Now we should dive in a little bit on the investigation of these murders.
Now, this is where things get messy, literally and figuratively. You had two police forces, the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police, two different jurisdictions, two different leadership styles, and they did not communicate well. Added in the fact that there was no fingerprinting, no DNA, no crime scene preservation, and you can see why this case spiraled. Erica, I want your take on this. Do you think the investigation failed because of the error or because of the chaos surrounding the case?
I think it's a little bit of both. Think about this time period. Yes, crime investigation was not as forthcoming as it is now. So that, of course, plays a role. But also, I can't imagine during this time period, it was probably very serious and very well communicated through the press at that time what was happening. This is serious. This is scary. These women are so close to each other. We have no leads. I think it's kind of a combination of both on that. What do you think, Jada?
I think it is both, honestly. I agree with you. I really tried to lean more towards, oh, it was just the era of the time. But I also think it had to do with a little bit of the chaos when, you have media coverage, when you have two different police forces that are doing things totally different. I think that causes a lot of room for error. But I do also think with no fingerprints, no DNA, I feel like put this crime in 2025 with all the technology and the police forces that we have now, could he get away with it? I don't think so. I think with the lack of evidence at that time, I think you almost had to catch the person red-handed.
Exactly. And I mean, the public imagination aspect of this case is huge.
Yeah. One of the most haunting aspects of this case is how much of it unfolded in public imagination rather than confirmed fact. Letters signed Jack the Ripper were sent to newspapers, a police, some containing graphic details and taunts, while many were likely hoax. At least one letter included a piece of human tissue.
Wow. And like we already mentioned, policing methods during this time were very limited. We had no fingerprints, no DNA, no centralized databases, and poor communication between districts. Witness descriptions were pretty unreliable, lighting was minimal, and many residents distrusted the police force. This allowed the killer to vanish repeatedly, even as the city flooded with patrols. So my question is, if this happened today, do you think you'd get away with it? And I think we already all know the answer to that.
Right. I don't think so.
So I wanted to talk about the letters that the police force had gotten at the time. There was the Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, but one that stuck with me was the From Hell letter. It was sent with half a kidney, and some people think it was real, others think it was just a journalist trying to boost newspaper sales. And a fun fact here is that historians are still arguing about whether any of these letters were actually written by the killer. Because it's hard to say. This was so long ago, there's not factual evidence to go off of. It's just another legend. Oh,
I agree with that. Is it actually for him or a journalist? But I agree with that.
Data, walk us through some of the suspects.
Now, this is where the rabbit hole gets deep. Okay, you guys, there are hundreds of suspects, but a few names always come up. So, first we have Montague John Dwight as a barrister and teacher who died shortly after the last murder. Still thinks guilt drove him to suicide. So, that's what people are saying. We have Aaron Kaminski, a Polish immigrant with a mental health struggles. Modern DNA claims point to him, but the science is a little shaky behind that, so he's still on the suspect list. We have George Chapman, a known poisoner. He has a violent history and he lived in Whitechapel. He's on the suspect list. His motive is usually poison. We have Thomas Cutbush, and he was institutionalized for violent behavior. So he's on the list. And then we have Prince Albert Victor, a royal conspiracy theory. This one was widely dismissed, but it's still popular in pop culture. And the last one we have is Walter. He's an artist accused by author Patricia Cornwell, but most experts have rejected this theory as well. So if you had to pick the most plausible suspect, not the most dramatic on who you think would fit the profile best, but the most plausible, who do you think would fit the profile?
That's tricky. George Chapman, who lived in Whitechapel, sticks out to me because, like we said, these women were walking distance from each other, and we think this person knew the area. So that one stands out to me, but it's really hard to say because this is such a long time ago and there's such a lack of evidence.
I would say George Chapman, just because the fact he does live in Whitechapel, but then I look at Thomas, he was institutionalized for violent behavior. And the fact that he attacked the women with rage,
Right.
I don't know.
That's a good point.
For me, George sounds plausible because he lives in the area, but it's unlikely to me after watching all the true crime shows that I have for
Mhm.
somebody to change their MO. So why would he go from poisoning people to then cutting people up? So that's what's really having me be like, maybe not him, but hey, maybe he's only ever gotten caught for poisoning. I don't know. But it did say a violent history. I feel like the victims were handled. Yes, it was violent, but I don't think these were random pickings. And I feel like a violent history gives random violence.
I would say that there's a chance that none of these people on this list are the real killer. This is just all word of mouth at this point. I think Raya was gonna close this out, talking about the suspects here.
Over the years, hundreds of suspects has been proposed. Doctors, actresses, politicians, royal immigrants, and even women. Each suspect reflects the fears and bias of the era. No theory has ever been proven, and modern DNA testing has produced conflicting and controversial results.
Here's another fun or creepy fact. Some modern criminologists believe Jack the Ripper might not have even been a single person at all. It could have been multiple killers whose crimes were just lumped together by the media.
Wow.
Let's get into our last topic for today and just talk about the paranormal and folklore angles. And to me, it's the part that fits into our show so perfectly. Whitechapel. It is considered one of the most haunted districts in London, and a lot of that is tied to the Ripper murders. Hauntings have occurred near crime scenes, and people report shadow figures in Mitre Square, cold spots on Hambury Street, and footsteps that follow you even when the street is empty.
The next one is Mary Jane Kelly's room. Her room at Miller's Court is said to be one of the most active paranormal hotspots. Visitors claim to hear crying, whispers, and seeing flickering lights. Some say Jack the Ripper wasn't human, that he was a demon or a shapeshifter or even a time traveler who vanished back into the future. Obviously, these theories are fringed, but they show how deeply this case embedded itself into folklore. Ryan, do you think the hauntings are tied to the tragedies itself or the energy people bring when they visit the sites?
Oof. That's a tough one, but I think both because the hunting and the tragedy itself is insane. Just was violence, rage, everything. Because of the era, you do got people talking about it and then going and visiting the sites. I think a little of both.
I totally agree. I think it's both. And ghost tours in Whitechapel are still some of the most popular in London. People love the mystery, even if they're terrified the whole time. And I feel like that resonates with me so much. I love it, but holy crap, this is crazy.
Like, part of me like, hey, let's get passports and go. But part of me was like, I would not be leaving anywhere at night. So I'd be too scared.
And I think now to close out, we're going to touch on why this case been so enduring.
Some historians argue that Jack the Ripper represents more than a killer. He represents Victorian society's failure, a city that ignores poverty, exploiting women, and allowed entire neighborhoods to fall into despair. The murders forced London to confront uncomfortable truths about class, gender, and neglect. Jack the Ripper endures because he exists in the space between fact and folklore. He's a real criminal wrapped in myth, shaped by media, fear, and time. Every generation reinterprets him as a monster, a symbol, or a cautionary tale. And that's the most chilling part. Question: if the mystery were solved tomorrow, do you think it would finally bring peace or ruin the legend?
I feel like you can't ruin the legend at this point because it's been going on for so long. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think that some sense of peace and normality will come if this was solved, but the legend's still going to be there because it's been around for this long. What do you think, Jada?
I agree with Erica. I think that it will bring some sense of peace, but I think the legend will still be there. And I think the legend won't die off if it's solved. I think it would bring it full circle, if that makes sense.
And there's also a darker psychological angle here. The idea that this killer stopped voluntarily, died, or simply blended back into normal life is pretty unsettling for me. There was never arrest, no confession, no closure, just absolute silence. That unanswered ending is what keeps this fear alive.
Why does this case still matter? Why are we still talking about it in 2026? Because it taps into something universal: fear of the unknown, a killer who vanished without a trace, a mystery with no ending, a story shaped by class, misogyny, and media frenzy. Jack the Ripper became the world's first global serial killer celebrity, and that's a legacy we're still unpacking. Do you think this case would have been solved if it happened today? Probably.
Yep.
And honestly, part of the reason it endures is because we don't know the truth. Humans hate unfinished stories. So tonight, we walked through the fog of Whitechapel, honored the victims, explored the chaos of the investigation, and dipped into the hauntings that still echo through London's oldest streets. Whether Jack the Ripper was a single man, multiple killers, or something stranger, the mystery still continues to pull us in. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow, share, subscribe to the Sisters of the Shadows. And next week, we're diving into another legend that refuses to die. But until then, stay curious, stay safe, and stay out of the shadows.
You've been listening to Sisters of the Shadows. Share this episode, follow us on TikTok, X, and Instagram, and keep the light close until next time.